Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for July 19th, 2026. And today we're going to talk about Tropical Depression 2, which is formed in the Gulf from Invest 91L, and things are continuing to escalate with it as the entire Gulf Coast is now on tropical alert. Anywhere from western Florida to potentially as far west as Texas needs to monitor the progress of Tropical Depression 2 closely, and there are many scenarios possible with what could happen with this system today, and we're going to go over all of those scenarios, including what the National Hurricane Center is forecasting. But I warned all of you guys at the start of the weekend, and even from Friday, and even from a week ago, that we could be in for a surprise tropics-wise this weekend, and it looks like that surprise is now coming to fruition. So we have a lot to talk about today. Let's get started right away. First off, with the National Hurricane Center homepage to take a look at the latest stats on Tropical Depression 2 right now in the Gulf of Mexico. It is right now with maximum sustained winds at 30 miles per hour with a minimum central pressure of 1,011 millibars. So a weak depression right now, but it's only just getting started. And it is probably going to intensify here in the next few days as it generally moves towards the Gulf Coast. Where exactly, though, is a little bit uncertain right now. But as I said before, anywhere from western Florida all the way to as far west as Texas is in play. And I do believe everywhere along the northern Gulf Coast needs to watch closely and prepare for the possibility of a potential direct landfall in your area. And very likely as well, this will become a named storm, our next named storm of the season here in the Atlantic, which is Bertha. And there's even an outside chance that depending on what happens here, we could see something a little bit stronger than just a tropical storm from this depression. So a lot to watch for today. And then we obviously have stuff in the Eastern Pacific here, which I'm not going to touch upon too much, but I do want to mention it really briefly. We have Tropical Storm Alita, which is dying out, failed to reach hurricane intensity and will not do so anymore. It's going to weaken from here on out. But Tropical Depression 6E might become a hurricane as it moves on off to the west-northwest, maybe even stronger than that, but more than likely it'll stay offshore away from land and not, directly impacting anybody with tropical impacts, unlike Tropical Depression 2. And then we have another area behind that in the Eastern Pacific. Tropical hurricane train here is starting up, and it's going to stay this way for probably the next few weeks. But mainly focusing right now on Tropical Depression 2 in the Gulf. Again, latest maximum sustained winds are at 30 miles per hour. And over the next few days, it's going to generally move on off to the north west here, and then eventually take a bend back towards the west. And right now, in the very least, right now it looks like the direct landfall will more than likely be on eastern Louisiana. But then it kind of moves on off to the west, and then at least the current National Hurricane Center forecast track even brings this and makes this do a little bit of a southerly, southwesterly sort of bend for a little bit, and we kind of have this storm riding the entire Gulf Coast all the way up until Texas here. But something that I want you to keep in mind is look at how large the cone of uncertainty is. Stretching again all the way from western Florida, in which we could see this track northward too and potentially make a landfall, all the way to as far south as southern Texas. And the cone of uncertainty here represents all of the spatial area in which a track is possible. The cone of uncertainty, I guess, so a lot of people always kind of misunderstand what the purpose of the cone of uncertainty is. People tend to think it's the forecast of where the impacts are likely going to be. No, the impacts are very much going to be felt in or outside of the cone, depending on where we see this depression track. In fact, tropical storm warnings are in effect right now, or tropical storm watches are in effect right now for western Florida, extending all the way to Oka. I actually forgot the name. I'm sorry, but anywhere from, I believe, probably just to the south of Tallahassee here, all the way to the Florida-Alabama border. We have tropical storm watches currently in effect, and most of those watches right now are outside of the cone. So again, impacts are not predicted by the cone of uncertainty. It is mainly the potential for where the track might be. And again, it pretty much encompasses the entire northern Gulf Coast here. And that's kind of the main picture with Tropical Depression 2 right now. There is a lot of uncertainty as to what exactly is going to happen. And we will not find out until we actually see how Tropical Depression 2 plays out itself. So with that being said, let's take a look at how it's doing right now. And you could see definitely a interesting looking system. One thing that stood out to me ever since this morning is the fact that already we seem to have a pretty decent structure here. I mean, we have some of these curved bands kind of wrapping around into the center, which is again roughly just to the west of Tampa, it seems, and in the eastern Gulf. And you kind of already have these, bands wrapping in around it. And for sure, it definitely has a very solid low-level center that I think we can all see very clearly here on satellite. So there's already one requirement that it needs for development. And then we also have some interesting convective activity as well. We do have deep convection blowing up, but it is kind of sporadic right now. Convection is a little bit anemic. And that's because there's still some dry air in the vicinity of 2L here. So it kind of has to fight off that dry air a little bit, but I'm pretty sure, especially as we get towards tomorrow morning when we reach the next diurnal maximum oceanic convective cycle here, which is pretty much when convective activity usually peaks during a day, is, in the overnight hours into the early morning hours as the sun rises. We're probably going to start seeing a lot of deep convection blow up over the center here. And this thing is definitely going to intensify again, probably becoming a named storm at most by tomorrow morning. In fact, the National Hurricane Center expects that this will become a tropical storm by tomorrow morning. And let's really quickly take a look at the intensity forecasted by the National Hurricane Center right now. They have this getting as strong as 60 miles per hour potentially over the next few days here. So in the very least, a tropical storm is expected. And of course, the next name on the list would be Bertha. Taking a look at the vorticity signature associated with the depression right now, and you can see it has that round circular look that you would look at for the vorticity here. And it definitely, again, tells us that this does have a very solid low-level center. And the structure is definitely there for this to intensify decently over the next few days. Eventually, this will run into some issues with shear, but again, it'll depend on how quickly it's able to intensify here over the next few days. But its low-level structure is already pretty decent, and right now, wind shear is actually pretty low over the northeastern Gulf. We have very low wind shear values, especially right over the top of the storm here. Seems like we're looking at wind shear values as low as 10 to maybe even 5 knots of shear. So shear is definitely not an issue right now. So we have deep convection, and we have definitely a good low-level center and low wind shear. Already a good footing for Tropical Depression 2 here to probably intensify over the next few days. But just how much it does so will definitely heavily depend on what it does with its track. And to show you that, let's take a look at the models here, starting off with the European ensembles. And if you caught my live stream that I did earlier today, I mentioned that there seems to be two main kind of ideas here for what the potential track of this depression will probably be and what the potential outcome will more than likely be. And first off, as you can see here with some of these northerly ensembles, as you can see, the ensembles that track more towards the Louisiana and Mississippi Gulf Coast, or maybe towards Florida, those ensembles tend to be a little bit on the weaker side and don't intensify as much. We're probably looking at a low-end tropical storm, maybe a moderate-end tropical storm at most, if that scenario happens. But interestingly enough, a lot of these ensembles here on the European, especially as we get more towards the west, especially the ensembles here that take more of a westerly and southerly track, are much stronger. In fact, the European ensembles actually have a few major hurricane members in the Western Gulf here. Now, whether or not that happens, I'm not sure, and I'm inclined to believe that we're probably not going to get a major hurricane out of this system, or you wouldn't think, but that kind of highlights the two ideas that I mentioned. One of them, of course, being a more northerly track, which results in a more weaker system, while a more westerly track and a more southerly track, we would likely have a much stronger system. And obviously, a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're going to have more time over water, but also very warm sea surface temperatures too, and probably the fact that this storm would probably be stronger in the shorter term would allow it to track more towards the west. And I'll show you why that'll play to its advantage, especially with the upper level pattern in just a moment here when I go to the operational models. But you also see this trend as well that the European ensembles do with the Google AI ensembles as well. You have the northerly tracks a little bit weaker, and then especially these tracks here that are offshore and south of Louisiana in the Western Gulf showing stronger solutions. So the fact that both of the model ensembles here are converging around the same general idea, you have to pay attention to the ideas here. You have to know what to look for, especially when it comes to these models, because these ideas will be very important to keep in mind going forward, especially if you want to think about the multiple different possibilities that might happen here with this depression, especially given the amount of uncertainty that we are still in right now. But the two general ideas, again, just looking at these two ensemble plots alone, remain the same. Again, northerly tracks here, a little bit weaker. Tracks that go towards eastern Louisiana or Mississippi, so they spend a little bit less time over water, versus the more westerly tracks and kind of bend towards the south a little bit towards the end, and track towards the Western Gulf and Texas are much stronger. And of course, when you kind of combine these two ensembles, I will say they do fit pretty well with the forecast uncertainty from the National Hurricane Center, where the cone of uncertainty extends all the way from as far south as Texas and southern Texas to western Florida. So I think everything kind of aligns pretty nice, perfectly there. And even taking a look at the operational models, starting with the GFS here, you could also see those two ideas kind of pan out. The GFS going a little bit more towards the northerly route here, where you see we definitely have a system here that develops and probably intensifies and maybe becomes a low-end tropical storm here in the northern Gulf. But the GFS obviously keeps this weak as it tracks towards Mississippi and Alabama and western Florida, and it roughly comes ashore, I would say, probably late Tuesday, early Wednesday, before then just completely dissipating immediately, but probably still leaving behind rainfall. And that's going to be another issue too. No matter what happens here, probably the most consistent impact will be the rainfall. But of course, intensity and track will have an impact on who sees how much rainfall, if you will. But the GFS kind of aligning here more with the northerly solutions that are weaker. And a big part of that, besides the fact that it's going to be over water less, comes from the wind shear aspect as well. As you can see, especially in the northern Gulf here, as we get towards Tuesday and Wednesday, wind shear is definitely very strong. So that'll, rip to shreds whatever does try to, track towards the northern Gulf, and obviously would not be favorable for much development. Hence why we have a weaker solution. But the European AI ensembles, on the other hand, and let me really quickly refresh and see if the 12Z run is out. You could see here, and actually the 12Z run is out, so that's great. But you could see the European AI, on the other hand, has a different solution. It actually makes this storm go towards the west, and it aligns with the ensembles here that show a more westerly and stronger solution. As you can see here, the European AI tracks towards Texas, and it definitely has a stronger solution here, 1,002 millibars, even 998 millibars just off the coast of eastern Louisiana here. So the European AI, so you could kind of see the dynamic here between the two models that kind of fall in line with the two different solutions. With the GFS here, let's really quickly reload the GFS. The GFS showing a more northerly and weaker solution, and the European showing a more southerly and westerly solution, which also causes it to be stronger. And the European AI, you have to keep in mind as well, is a lower resolution. So whatever intensity it shows now, in reality, is probably slightly stronger. But even with the shear forecast as well, you could see here that in the Western Gulf, unlike the Northern Gulf, you don't have very strong wind shear, very light winds at the upper levels, and you could also see we even have a few outflow channels as well developing, as the system tracks on off towards the west. So once again, it kind of aligns with the, more northerly track, a weaker storm, and more, westerly track, potentially a stronger storm. So lots of solutions to keep in mind. And again, it definitely puts the entire Northern Gulf, anywhere from, again, Texas to potentially Western Florida, at risk. So if you are anywhere along the Northern Gulf Coast, you need to be watching the tropics here this weekend. And moving on to the ships data as well. The ships data, by the way, is kind of a statistical model output, which is run specifically for when we get invests or designated tropical cyclones. And I especially really like to look at the ships data to see, because they have rapid intensification probabilities, and that's probably the most popular thing that the ships data is used for. And you can see there is actually a little bit of a chance for rapid intensification according to the ships. 12% in the next 24 hours for 25 knots. And we even have an 8% chance of 55 knots rapid intensification in the next 48 hours. And of course, any sort of intensification that happens here in the next hours to the next day or so will have implications on whether or not it ends up being stronger, which will impact its track, potentially bringing it more towards the west, or, of course, it being more northerly and because of that weaker. And kind of looks like the ships maybe goes more towards the north, and because of that, it doesn't really show as strong of a storm. Looks like the latest forecast intensity is only 34 knots, so that would roughly be a minimal tropical storm at best by the ships, and that makes sense given that it has a little bit more of a northerly track. But I guess, for the possibilities that it ends up stronger, you do see that there is a potential for rapid intensification. So we'll definitely monitor whether or not that happens as well. But taking a look at sea surface temperatures here, something that I've been talking about for a while, ever since the beginning of the week, ever since last week, sea surface temperatures are definitely very warm here in the Northern Gulf. And hats off to Alex Borham for Cyclonic Weather for creating these, storm-specific, sea surface temperature graphs where we kind of zoom in on the specific area where a storm is to look at, parameters like sea surface temperatures. And you can see here throughout the entire Northern Gulf, pretty much in the path of the depression, we have very warm sea surface temperatures, many areas exceeding 30 degrees Celsius, even some 31 degrees Celsius readings, especially closer to Louisiana. So sea surface temperatures are definitely going to be a favorable factor, and especially if this storm is able to track more towards the west and stay offshore, that's going to be quite some time here, probably at least 3 or 4 days of sea surface temperatures above 30 degrees Celsius. And upper ocean heat content too, the amount of heat in the ocean, the amount of heat energy in the ocean that tropical cyclones can use, and that kind of is a measurement of how much warm water there is below the surface, rather than just seeing the sea surface temperatures, the temperatures right at the surface of the ocean. If we have depth to those warm waters, which is what tropical cyclone heat potential represents, that also is a major positive as well for intensification and there definitely is an abundance of upper ocean heat content or heat or tropical cyclone heat potential here in the northern Gulf. So, especially if this is able to stay offshore, once again, would definitely be a very interesting solution here that we will have to watch very closely. And especially if this is able to stay towards the west, maybe if you are in Texas, you're going to have to watch the progress of this depression here, especially closely, as we might be dealing with a strong storm. And it would not surprise me. Again, I said that coming into this weekend, I would not be surprised if the tropics surprise us and we do end up getting a system here. And I'm going to say once again, I would not be surprised if we do get a stronger storm here, especially if the trends continue, and especially if this storm continues to overperform compared to what the models show, because especially if you go back a few days ago, models like the GFS and even the Euro were barely showing development of this system here in the Gulf. So we're definitely already exceeding those model runs and those predictions. Maybe we might exceed even further. And of course, if that's the case, that only means more problems here for the Gulf Coast and for impacts and things like that. So lots to watch here in the tropics over the next few days. And I hope you all stay tuned, especially again, if you are in the northern Gulf Coast, keep your eyes glued to the tropics. Do not panic. As I say, you cannot panic, but also you cannot hope the storm away, because hope is not a planning tool. Watching the tropics is, and making sure that you have all of your plans, your hurricane plans ready, your evacuation plans ready. Get everything together now. Even if you are not going to experience a direct landfall in your area, it's always better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. And again, we will be watching the tropics here very closely over the next several days. So I hope you guys stay tuned, and I hope you guys keep it here. And if you want to be able to do that, I would really appreciate if you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Follow me on Twitter as well at Danilo Evangelista, so you can get updates and posts throughout the day instead of having to wait, for me to post a video on YouTube. So make sure to follow me there as well. And if you do decide to subscribe to me on YouTube, make sure to turn on the notification bell so you can get any video that I upload the second I upload it. All right. With that being said, that's going to wrap it up for today's discussion, or the discussion for now, because I might have another video discussion later tonight, depending on how things develop, especially if we do get a named storm tonight out of Tropical Depression 2 here. But we will definitely have updates throughout the day tomorrow and throughout the week, as long as we are tracking this storm here. So once again, make sure to stay tuned. And make sure to keep your eyes out here on the tropics. Thanks for watching, though. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and I'll talk to you guys again for sure very, very soon.